Well, shocked by what I heard in the report, clearly racist. And I think this is a test of leadership because...
Well, he's distanced himself.
Well, he
said
has.
they're reprehensible, hasn't he?
Well, he has, but you have to ask the question why so many people who are supporting reform seem to be exposed in this particular way. It's for a leader to change his or her party, to make sure the culture is right and the standards are understood by everybody within the party. That's why I've changed the Labour Party. That's why I put it to a party which says country first, party second.
He has appealed,
and
doesn't
leadership has to be shown.
Keir Starmer's live announcement stunned the nation, catching nearly everyone by surprise. The man who had once pledged to restore integrity and stability to British politics now found himself at the heart of a political storm. After weeks of growing scandals, mounting protests, and tremendous pressure from both the public and his own party, Starmer finally addressed the media with a statement that would redefine the course of Labour's future. As he appeared before the cameras, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Starmer's expression was somber, his voice calm, yet the seriousness of the situation was undeniable. The British public, already shaken by the chaos within Labour, anxiously awaited his response, hoping for clarity amidst the growing uncertainty. Everyone was left wondering, was this the last act of a leader on the verge of collapse, or a strategic move aimed at turning things around for the party? Starmer had been under intense scrutiny for weeks. Allegations of financial mismanagement and corrupt dealings had shaken the Labour Party to its core. Once seen as a man of integrity, Starmer's credibility was now in question. Protests calling for his resignation grew louder across the country, with accusations of hypocrisy and failure gaining traction from the opposition, led by Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. Yet, in an unexpected turn of events, instead of stepping down, Starmer announced he would not resign. In a bold and surprising move, he called for a snap general election. His decision sent shockwaves through the political world. The moment was electric with uncertainty. Was this a desperate attempt to save his reputation, or a calculated move to regain public trust? Starmer's decision caused ripples throughout the political establishment. Some saw it as a brave move, a last-ditch effort to regain control. Others believed it was reckless, a gamble that could weaken Labour even more. Regardless of how it was interpreted, one thing became clear. Starmer's choice would forever change the course of his leadership and the future of the Labour Party. The nation now waited to see if his gamble would pay off or if it would mark the beginning of the end for his political career. As weeks of mounting pressure unfolded, the political crisis surrounding Keir Starmer and the Labour Party intensified, pushing the party toward a breaking point. Starmer, once held as the savior of the Labour Party, now found himself in the midst of the most severe crisis of his political career. Accusations of financial misconduct, corruption, and mismanagement had steadily eroded his once solid reputation. What began as low-level discontent within his own ranks quickly escalated into a full-blown political storm, leaving Starmer's leadership in jeopardy. Public frustration reached new heights, with protests erupting across major cities in the UK. Citizens demanded Starmer's resignation and the calling of a fresh general election. The political discourse was dominated by increasingly hostile calls for his removal, with each day revealing deeper dysfunction within Labour and new revelations about the scandal. The question that plagued the nation was whether Starmer could weather this storm, or if the damage to his credibility had become irreparable. His failure to respond swiftly placed him in a precarious position. His leadership had become a burden, with many of his closest allies distancing themselves from him. The unity that once defined the party had fractured, with key Labour figures questioning whether Starmer was capable of guiding them through the crisis. Behind closed doors, Labour MPs were divided, some pushing for his resignation, while others feared that removing him would plunge the party into an even deeper crisis. As public support for Starmer rapidly declined, the pressure on him to take decisive action grew. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party quickly seized the opportunity, relentlessly attacking his leadership. Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, wasted no time portraying Starmer as a weak, indecisive leader who had failed to meet the demands of the British people and was attempting to avoid accountability. While Starmer's position within his own party weakened, the public response was divided. Some viewed his failure to act decisively as a clear sign of weakness, while others saw his actions as desperate attempts to salvage his leadership. With relentless attacks from both his own party and the opposition, it seemed that Labour was on the verge of collapse. The party, once a major force in British politics, now appeared divided and without direction. Each passing day without a clear response from Starmer only deepened the crisis, leaving Labour struggling to regain its footing in an increasingly hostile political environment. As the crisis surrounding Keir Starmer deepened, it became increasingly clear that the rifts within the Labour Party were not just temporary issues, but a profound transformation in its structure. The mounting revelations of financial mismanagement, secretive deals, and the party's failure to confront corruption directly had already severely damaged its reputation. However, the real turning point came with the escalating tension between Starmer and his own MPs, marking a more dangerous and destabilizing phase for Labour. Once seen as a unified party dedicated to justice and democratic values, Labour now seemed to be splintering at its core. For weeks, the opposition, led by the Conservative Party, had capitalized on Labour's internal turmoil, painting Starmer as a leader who had lost control over both his party and the political narrative. As Labour MPs became more vocal in their criticism of Starmer, the party's solidarity began to dissolve. Whispers of a leadership challenge intensified behind closed doors, with senior figures who had once been Starmer's strongest supporters now questioning his ability to lead the party through the looming election. With public trust in Starmer at a historic low, it was clear that his leadership had become more of a liability than an asset. However, within the party, there was no consensus on how to proceed. Some MPs pushed for a quick replacement of Starmer, believing that distancing the party from him would help it recover. Others feared that removing him could lead to even greater chaos and instability, particularly as the general election loomed closer. Labour found itself in a precarious position, not just battling a scandal but fighting for its survival. At the same time, the rise of Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, placed additional pressure on the party. As Labour's internal struggles became more public, Reform UK gained ground among voters who had grown disillusioned with the two major parties. Farage capitalized on Labour's failure to act decisively, positioning himself as a force for real change and transparency. This only intensified the urgency within Labour, which now risked losing its political relevance as the establishment began to shift. As the debate within the party grew more heated, calls for Starmer's resignation became louder, with some MPs even speculating about possible leadership replacements. However, no clear successor emerged, which only deepened the uncertainty. Starmer's refusal to resign left Labour at a crossroads, torn between loyalty to a leader whose credibility had collapsed and the reality that his continued leadership could further harm the party's future. With the road ahead filled with uncertainty, it was impossible to predict whether Labour could recover from the damage already inflicted. As the pressure on Keir Starmer's leadership mounted, the internal dynamics within the Labour Party reached a critical tipping point. The intensifying public backlash, coupled with unrelenting attacks from the Conservative Party, pushed Labour to face a pivotal moment. Initially seen as a challenge to Starmer's credibility, the scandal began to threaten the very survival of the party. Internal divisions within Labour became more evident by the day, as some MPs called for his immediate resignation, while others feared that removing him could plunge the party into even greater chaos. Starmer's refusal to step down, despite overwhelming calls for his resignation, deepened the political turmoil within Labour. Protests erupted across major cities, demanding his resignation, yet the party's response was fragmented and ineffective. MPs who had once firmly supported Starmer began to openly criticize his leadership, questioning not only his ability to lead, but also his capability to restore the trust that had been lost. His failure to take decisive action and his reluctance to accept responsibility for the growing scandal only reinforced the belief that he was disconnected from both his party and the electorate. The increasingly loud calls for leadership change created an atmosphere of instability, with whispers of a leadership challenge gaining momentum. Behind the scenes, senior Labour members quietly discussed potential replacements for Starmer, yet the lack of a clear successor only contributed to the confusion. The absence of unity within the party became glaringly obvious, and the leadership vacuum continued to widen. Starmer's failure to regain control only worsened the situation, turning what was once a political scandal into an existential crisis for Labour. It was evident that the party was not just battling the fallout from the scandal, but also facing a threat to its very future. Meanwhile, the rise of Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, added further pressure on Labour. Farage's populist rhetoric resonated with many disillusioned voters who were increasingly frustrated with the traditional political establishment. His growing influence was seen as a direct challenge to Labour's historical dominance. As Reform UK gained momentum, the pressure on Starmer intensified, leaving many questioning whether Labour could ever recover from the internal struggles and reputational damage it had sustained. With each passing day, the party's credibility eroded further, and more voters turned to alternatives. Starmer's leadership now seemed inextricably linked to Labour's fate, and the uncertainty surrounding his future made it clear that the road ahead for the party was fraught with division and instability. The longer the leadership crisis continued, the more the public perception of Labour worsened, leaving the party facing an uncertain and tumultuous future. The pressure on Keir Starmer continued to mount from within the Labour Party, and the growing dissatisfaction among the public, signalling a dramatic shift in the political climate. As Labour scrambled to regain its footing, the depth of its internal divisions became increasingly clear. What began as a leadership crisis now threatened to tear the party apart. Some MPs were adamant that Starmer must resign, believing his continued leadership would lead to further ruin, while others feared that removing him could create even more chaos and division, worsening the situation. The political quagmire that Labour found itself in only deepened as the party's unity began to dissolve. Starmer's reluctance to act decisively in response to the scandal was further exacerbated by his failure to restore his public image. His credibility, once a key asset for the party, had been severely damaged, and the public began to see him as a leader disconnected from the people he had pledged to serve. The lack of clear direction within Labour became painfully obvious as MPs and officials struggled to determine the best course of action. Behind closed doors, whispers of leadership challenges grew louder, with some senior figures suggesting that a leadership change might be the only way to salvage the party's reputation. However, the absence of a clear successor only added to the turmoil, making any change in leadership more complicated. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party seized upon Labour's vulnerability, escalating their attacks and framing the scandal as a referendum on Labour's ability to govern. Rishi Sunak and other Tory figures painted Starmer as a weak and ineffective leader, capitalising on the internal strife within Labour to improve their own position. Labour's struggles were compounded by the rise of Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, whose populist rhetoric resonated with voters who felt let down by the established political elite. Farage's growing influence further intensified the urgency within Labour, as his challenge to Labour's traditional dominance became more apparent. Starmer's inability to unite his party and confront the scandal head-on left him increasingly isolated. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Labour found itself trapped between a rebellious internal faction and an emboldened opposition. With every passing day, it became more evident that Labour's future as a viable political force was at risk. The party seemed unable to adapt to the shifting political landscape, and its position was growing more tenuous with each new revelation. The path forward was uncertain at best. As the political turmoil surrounding Keir Starmer and the Labour Party escalated, public trust in the party plummeted to alarming levels. What had started as a policy-focused debate soon shifted to the party's internal chaos. With calls for leadership changes gaining traction, Starmer, once hailed as the figure who would restore Labour's strength, increasingly became a symbol of its decline. His refusal to resign, despite mounting pressure from MPs and the public, only intensified the crisis. Each passing day saw his credibility further unravel, and Labour's hopes of presenting a united front for the upcoming elections grew slimmer. The party was at a tipping point, its leadership fractured and its prospects uncertain. Media coverage of the scandal was relentless, painting a bleak picture of Labour's internal divisions. The public responded with a mixture of frustration and disillusionment, with many now questioning the party's ability to govern. The unity Labour had once aimed to present in the run-up to the general election now seemed out of reach. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party, grappling with its own challenges, wasted no time in capitalising on Labour's struggles. Figures like Rishi Sunak framed Starmer's leadership as ineffective and chaotic, positioning themselves as a more stable alternative to the disarray within Labour. The stage was set for a fierce political battle, with Labour's credibility hanging in the balance and its leadership increasingly uncertain. The public, tired of instability, seemed ready to embrace a new direction, and the growing support for the Conservatives was a clear reflection of Labour's faltering position. The party's ability to recover from this crisis, let alone mount a successful election campaign, now appeared doubtful. The stakes had never been higher, and with Labour's future on the line, the question remained whether it could regain the trust it had lost. See you again.